morning, good afternoon, good evening, boys and girls. Today we shall continue our bedtime story via the reading of Lombard Street. And this version of Lombard Street is brought to you by our personal finance lobby. So if you guys need any help with tax planning, estate planning, go to the personal finance lobby, don't come to me. Cool. Now, we shall continue where we left off, which was page 59 of the particular version of Lombard Street that I had sent out to everyone. We will start at the first full paragraph. In consequence, from 1797 to 1844, when a new era begins, there never was a proper caution on the part of the bank directors. At heart, they considered that the Bank of England had a kind of charmed life, and that it was above the ordinary banking anxiety to pay its way. And this feeling was very natural. A bank of issue, which need not pay its notes in cash, has a charmed life. It can lend what it wishes and issue what it likes, with no fear of harm to itself, and with no substantial check but its own inclination. For nearly a quarter of a century, the Bank of England was such a bank. For all that time, it could not be in any danger, and naturally the public mind was demoralized also. Since 1797, the public have always expected the government to help the bank if necessary. I cannot fully discuss the suspensions of the Act of 1844 in 1857, 1857, and 1866. But indisputably, one of their effects is to make people think that government will always help the bank if the bank is in extremity. And this is the sort of anticipation which tends to justify itself and to cause what it expects. On the whole, the position of the Chancellor of the Exchequer in our money market is that of one who deposits largely in it, who created it, and who demoralized it. He cannot, therefore, banish it from his thoughts or decline responsibility for it. He must arrange his finances so as not to intensify panics, but to mitigate them. He must aid the Bank of England in the discharge of its duties. He must not impede or prevent it. His aid may be most efficient. He is, on finance, the natural exponent of the public opinion of England. And it is by that opinion that we wish the Bank of England to be guided. Under a natural system of banking, we should have relied on self-interest, but the state prevented that. We now only rely on opinion instead. The public approval is a reward, its disapproval a severe penalty on the bank directors, and of these it is most important that the finance minister should be a sound and felicitous exponent. Oh, that's it. Okay. All right, chapter 5. The mode in which the value of money is settled in Lombard Street. Many persons believe that the Bank of England has some peculiar power of fixing the value of money. They see that the Bank of England varies its minimum rate of discount from time to time, and that, more or less, all other banks follow its lead, and charge much as it charges, and they are puzzled why this should be. Money, as economists teach, is a commodity and only a commodity. Why then, it is asked, is its value fixed in so odd a way and not the way in which the value of all other commodities is fixed? There is at bottom, however, no difficulty in the matter. The value of money is settled, like that of all other commodities, by supply and demand, and only the form is essentially different. In other commodities, all the larger dealers fix their own price. They try to underbid one another, and that keeps down the price. They try to get as much as they can out of the buyer, and that keeps up the price. But between the two, what Adam Smith calls the higgling of the market settles it. And this is the most simple and natural mode of doing business, but it is not the only mode. If circumstances make it convenient, another may be adopted. A single large holder, especially if he be by far the greatest holder, may fix his price, and other dealers may say whether or not they will undersell him or whether or not they will ask more than he does. A very considerable holder of an article may, for a time, vitally affect its value if he lay down the minimum price which he will take and obstinately adhere to it. Oh, my face. Okay, let me just redo my face. Yes, I realize this is supposed to be a bedtime story, but what can you do? Sometimes you feel. Okay. Right, it's not just my face, it's my entire head. But what can you do? This is the way in which the value of money in. Oh, it died again. Also, hi, Miss Random, how are you? Hold on, we need to redo my face. Well, this was supposed to be a bedtime story segment, but with the face interruptions, it's making it much, much more difficult. Anyway, this is the way in which the value of money in Lombard Street is settled. The Bank of England used to be a predominant and is still the most important dealer in money. It lays down the least price at which alone it will dispose of its stock, and this, for the most part, enables other dealers to obtain that price or something near it. The reason is obvious. At all ordinary moments, there is not money enough in Lombard Street to discount all the bills in Lombard Street without taking some money from the Bank of England. As soon as the bank rate is fixed, a great many persons who have bills to discount try how much cheaper than the bank they can get these bills discounted. But they seldom can get them discounted very much cheaper, for if they did, everyone would leave the bank, and the outer market would have more bills than it could bear. In practice, when the bank finds this process beginning and sees that its business is much diminishing, it lowers the rate so as to secure a reasonable portion of the business to itself and to keep a fair part of its deposits employed. At Dutch auctions, an upset or maximum price used to be fixed by the seller, and he came down in his bidding till he found a buyer. The value of money is fixed in Lombard Street in much the same way, only that the upset price is not that of all sellers, but that of one very important seller, some part of whose supply is essential. The notion that the Bank of England has control over the money market and can fix the rate of discount as it likes has survived from the old days before 1844, when the bank could issue as many notes as it liked. But even then, the notion was a mistake. A bank with a monopoly of note issue has sudden great power in the money market, but no permanent power. It can affect the rate of discount at any particular moment, but it cannot affect the average rate. And the reason is that any momentary fall in money caused by the I actually don't know how to pronounce that word, of such a bank of itself tends to create an immediate and equal rise, so that upon an average, the value is not altered. What happens is this. If a bank with a monopoly of note issue suddenly lends, suppose, £2 million more than usual, it causes a proportional increase of trade and increase of prices. The persons to whom that £2 million was lent did not borrow it to lock it up. They borrow it, in the language of the market, to operate with. That is, they try to buy with it. And that new attempt to buy, that new demand, raises prices. And this rise of prices has three consequences. First, it makes everybody else want to borrow money. Money is not so efficient in buying as it was, and therefore operators require more money for the same dealings. If railway stock is 10% dearer this year than last, a speculator who borrows money to enable him to deal must borrow 10% more. And in consequence, there is an augmented demand for loans. Secondly, this is an effectual demand, for the increased price of railway stock enables those who wish it to borrow more upon it. The common practice is to lend a certain portion of the market value of such securities, in that if that value increases, the amount of the usual loan to be obtained on them increases too. In this way, therefore, any artificial reduction in the value of money causes a new augmentation of the demand for money, and thus restores that value to its natural level. In all business, this is well known by experience. A stimulated market soon becomes a tight market, for so sanguine are enterprising men that as soon as they get any unusual ease, they always fancy that the relaxation is greater than it is and speculate till they want more than they can obtain. In these two ways, sudden loans by an issuer of notes, though they may temporarily lower the value of money, do not lower it permanently, because they generate their own counteraction. And this they do whether the notes issued are convertible into coin or not. During the period of the bank restriction from 1797 to 1819, the Bank of England could not absolutely control the money market, any more than it could after 1819, when it was compelled to pay its notes in coin. But in the case of convertible notes, there is a third effect which works in the same direction and works more quickly. A rise of prices confined to one country tends to increase imports, because other countries can obtain more for their goods if they send them there, and it discourages exports because a merchant who would have gained a profit before the rise by buying here to sell again will not gain so much. If any profit after that rise. Oh, that was weird. Weird use of commas, but anyway. By this augmentation of imports, the indebtedness of this country is augmented, and by this diminution of exports, the proportion of that indebtedness which is paid in the usual way is decreased also. In consequence, there is a larger balance to be paid in bullion, the store in the bank or banks keeping the reserve is diminished, and the rate of interest must be raised by them to stay the efflux. And the tightness so produced is often greater than and always equal to the preceding unnatural laxity. There is, therefore, no ground for believing, as is so common, that the value of money is settled by different causes than those which affect the value of other commodities, or that the Bank of England has any despotism in that matter. It has the power of a large holder of money and no more. Even formerly, when its monetary prowess were greater and its rivals weaker, it had no absolute control. It was simply a large corporate dealer making bids and much influencing, though in no sense compelling, other dealers nearby. But though the value of money is not settled in an exceptional way, there is nevertheless a peculiarity about it, as there is about many articles. It is a commodity subject to great fluctuations of value, and those fluctuations are easily produced by a slight excess or a slight deficiency of quantity. Up to a certain point, money is a necessity. If a merchant has acceptances to meet tomorrow, money he must and will find today at some price or other. And it is this urgent need of the whole body of merchants which runs up the value of money so wildly and to such height in a great panic. On the other hand, money easily becomes a drug, as the phrase is, and there is soon too much of it. The number of accepted securities is limited and cannot be rapidly increased. If the amount of money seeking these accepted securities is more than can be lent on them, the value of money soon goes down. You may often hear in the market that bills are not to be had, meaning good bills, of course. When you hear this, you may be sure that the value of money is low. If money were all held by the owners of it, or by the banks which did not pay an interest of it, the value of money might not fall so fast. Money would, in the market phrase, be well held. The possessors would be under no necessity to employ it all. They might employ part at a high rate rather than all at a low rate. But in Lombard Street, money is very largely held by those who do pay an interest for it, and such persons must employ it all, or almost all, for they have much to pay out with one hand, and unless they receive much with the other, they will be ruined. Such persons do not so much care what is the rate of interest at which they employ their money. They can reduce the interest they pay in proportion to that which they can make. The vital point to them is to employ it at some rate. If you hold millions of other people's money at interest, arithmetic teaches that you will soon be ruined if you make nothing of it, even if the interest you pay is not high. The fluctuations in the value of money are therefore greater than those on the value of most other commodities. At times, there is an excessive pressure to borrow it, and at times, an excessive pressure to lend it, and so the prices are forced up and down. These considerations enable us to estimate the responsibility which is thrown on the Bank of England by our system, and by every system on the bank or banks who by it keep the reserve or bullion or of legal tender exchangeable for bullion. These banks can in no degree control the permanent value of money, but they can completely control its momentary value. They cannot change the average value, but they can determine the deviations from the average. If the dominant bank manage ill, the rate of interest will at one time be excessively high and at another time excessively low. There will be first a pernicious excitement and next a fatal collapse. But if they manage well, the rate of interest will not deviate so much from the average rate. It will neither ascend so high nor descend so low. As far as anything can be steady, the value of money will then be steady, and probably in consequence, trade will be steady too. At least the principal cause of periodical disturbances will have been withdrawn from it. Now, Chapter 6. Why Lombard Street is often very dull and sometimes extremely excited. Keep in mind that Lombard Street is actually, well, it was Wall Street before Wall Street was a thing. Right? Any sudden event which creates a great demand for actual cash may cause and will tend to cause a panic in a country where cash is much economized and whereby debts payable on demand are large. In such a country, an immense credit rests on a small cash reserve, and an unexpected and large diminution of that reserve may easily break up and shatter much. 1 second. Oops. Where were we? In such a country, an immense credit rests on a small cash reserve, and an unexpected and large diminution of that reserve may easily break up and shatter very much, if not the whole, of that credit. Such accidental events are of the most various nature: a bad harvest, an apprehension of foreign invasion, the sudden failure of a great firm which everybody trusted. Oh, FTX. And many other similar events have all caused a sudden demand for cash, and some writers have endeavored to classify panics according to the nature of the particular accidents producing them. But little, however, is, I believe, to be gained by such classifications. There is little difference in the effect of one accident and another upon our credit system. We must be prepared for all of them, and we must prepare for all of them in the same way by keeping a large cash reserve. In Confucianism, sorry, just to deviate from the topic for a little bit. In Confucianism, there is a constant saying, which is that you must learn from the mistakes of your elders. And one of the reasons why we read all of these wisdoms that are provided by our elders is not to trust them implicitly, but to understand that certain mistakes are made repeatedly in history, and to not make those mistakes. And yet, the modern financial system, especially with the 10 years of the Fed supercycle, as I keep calling it, we have consistently been relearning these lessons that were taught to us in 1870 by somebody who has relearned those lessons going back until the 1600s. There is no need for this. Read your history, learn your lessons. Temper your inner bro. But it is of great importance to point out that our industrial organization is liable not only to irregular external accidents, but likewise to regular internal changes. That these changes make our credit system much more delicate at some times than others, and that it is the recurrences of these periodical seasons of delicacy which have given rise to the notion that panic come according to a fixed rule, that every 10 years or so we must have one of them. Every 10 years indeed. Most persons who begin to think of the subject are puzzled on the threshold. They hear much of good times and bad times, meaning by good times in which nearly everyone is very well off, and by bad times in which nearly everyone is comparatively ill off. And at first, it is natural to ask, why should everybody, or almost everybody, be well off together? Why should there be any great tides of industry with large diffused profit by way of flow, and large diffused want of profit or loss by way of ebb? The main answer is hardly given distinctly in our common books of political economy. These books do not tell you what is the fund out of which large general profits are paid in good times, nor do they explain why that fund is not available for the same purposes in bad times. Our current political economy does not sufficiently take account of time as an element in trade operations. But as soon as the division of labor has once established itself in a community, two principles at once begin to be important, of which time is the very essence. These are, first, that as goods are produced to be exchanged, it is good that they should be exchanged as quickly as possible. Secondly, that as every producer is mainly occupied in producing what others want and not what he wants himself, it is desirable that he should always be able to find, without effort, without delay, and without uncertainty, others who want what he can produce. In themselves, these principles are self-evident. Everyone will admit it to be expedient that all goods wanting to be sold should be sold as soon as they are ready. That every man who wants to work should find employment as soon as he is ready for it. Obviously, also, as soon as the division of labor is really established, there is a difficulty about both of these principles. A produces what he thinks B wants, but it may be a mistake, and B may not want it. A may be able and willing to produce what B wants, but he may not be able to find B. He may not know of his existence. The general truth of these principles is obvious, but what is not obvious is the extreme greatness of their effects. Taken together, they make the whole difference between times of brisk trade and great prosperity and times of stagnant trade and great adversity. So far as that prosperity and that adversity are real and not illusory, if they are satisfied, everyone knows whom to work for and what to make, if he can get immediately in exchange what he wants himself. There is no idle labor and no sluggish capital in the whole community, and in consequence, all which can be produced is produced, the effectiveness of human industry is augmented, and both kinds of producers, both capitalists and laborers, are much richer than usual, because the amount to be divided between them is also much greater than usual. And there is a partnership in industries. No single large industry can be depressed without injury to other industries. Still less can any great group of industries. Each industry, when prosperous, buys and consumes the produce probably of most, certainly of very many, other industries, and if industry A fail and is in difficulty, industries B, C, D, which used to sell to it, will not be able to sell that which they have produced in reliance on A's demand, and in future they will stand idle till industry A recovers, because in default of A there will be no one to buy the commodities which they create. Then, as industry B buys of C, D, etc., the adversity of B tells on C and D. And as these buy of E, F, etc., the effect is propagated through the whole alphabet. In a certain sense, it rebounds. Z feels the want caused by the diminished custom of A, B, and C, and so it does not earn much. In consequence, it cannot lay out as much on the produce of A, B, and C, and so these do not earn as much either. In all this, money is but an instrument. The same thing would happen equally well in a trade of barter. If a state of barter on a very large scale were not practically impossible on account of the time and trouble which it would necessarily require, as has been explained, the fundamental cause is that under a system in which everyone is dependent on the labor of everyone else, the loss of one spreads and multiplies through all, and spreads and multiplies the faster, the higher the previous perfection of the system of divided labor, and the more nice and effectual the mode of interchange. And the entire effect of a depression in any single large trade requires a considerable time before it can be produced. It has to be propagated and to be returned through a variety of industries before it is complete. Short depressions, in consequence, have scarcely any discernible consequences. They are over before we think of their effects. It is only in the case of continuous and considerable depressions that the cause is an action long enough to produce discerning effects. And we shall pick this up next time. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, in conclusion, please download Firefox. Please don't use Google because Google is terrible, terrible. And we shall continue later this week. And let's wink with our right eye today, shall we? Wink. Good night.